Hey everybody, I'm doing a quick recording to talk to you today, just a little bit of a reinforcement about organizational structure on compare-contrast papers. I thought about the feedback that I've given you this week, which was narrative related, but the week before you had done some work on your compare-contrast, and I thought that we could reinforce this just a little bit before we submit your paper on Sunday night. So I came up with an idea to find a topic that maybe nobody has tackled, just to sort of, even the playing field here a little bit. I didn't want to do like comparison of Apple and Mac. There may be one or two of those papers floating out there. So I thought something a little different, but that everybody can benefit from. So generally speaking, there are two really traditional ways to work within compare contrast. I mean, there's more than two ways to sort of set up the paper. But the ones that we generally see here are option A that I have, which is point comparison. That's certain organizational style. And then the second one I have is block comparison. So you had some videos over the last week or two that probably highlighted this, maybe gave you a third option, but I think these are really effective. So I wanted to talk about this and use an example of comparing and contrasting HOAs versus unrestricted neighborhoods. And so what you have to think about is, okay, so how am I going to compare them? Making sure we're doing an apples to apples comparison. So I came up with these points and I thought, well, one of the main complaints people generally have with HOAs are costs. So let's do that. Let's talk about the costs. And obviously that's when it's going to be really obvious. There are more upfront costs in living with a neighborhood with an HOA. Generally speaking, there are certainly some exceptions to that. Then the second point would be governance. It's very bureaucratic working with an HOA. As a matter of fact, we just had to do a ton of paperwork to put a hot tub in our backyard, and I cannot tell you I had to get my neighbors to sign off on it. I had to take pictures. I had to pay a fee for them just to even review my application. And it was just very bureaucratic and interesting. Living in an unrestricted neighborhood is different. So as far as the governance or bureaucratic processes in place, you would have a lot of places for comparison with that section. Section 3 would be neighborhood aesthetics. So as part of the governance issue, a lot of it is to keep the home values up and to make the neighborhood look good and to keep sort of people in line. So I thought that aesthetics has a lot to do with HOA sort of coming about. I was thinking about the neighborhood that I used to live next to. I didn't live in this neighborhood. It's up in Reston, Virginia, and for the most part was actually really nice, and it was in an unrestricted part of Reston that wasn't part of Reston Association and didn't have a cluster. So most of the houses were well kept, and there were a couple though that I swear they were growing corn on the front yard. And what ends up happening in a situation in some of those unrestricted neighborhoods is that if you can't control how your next door neighbor leaves their property, it could actually affect your home value. So this idea of control over neighborhood aesthetics is one of those driving forces for HOAs. And of course, this is somewhat related to governance, isn't it? So there's a little bit of overlap, but that's okay. The sections don't have to be completely separate from one another. They're going to have some relationships to one another. So if you set your paper up in this fashion, what you're going to want to do is, of course, have an introduction paragraph. That's what's highlighted here in purple. And then you're going to organize it by the first section is you start with HOAs because HOA comes first in your topic. So you're setting it up. If you mention HOAs first, you mention HOAs first in the structure for consistency. So you have a paragraph about HOA costs, and then you have a paragraph about unrestricted neighborhood costs in general. And then you have 2 more paragraphs on governance, and then 2 more on neighborhood aesthetics. An important point, though, is that at the end of the second part of that comparison, you're going to find that you're going to want to use some traditional compare-contrast keywords it's not just you list the HOAs and then you list the unrestricted data and that you let readers draw their own conclusions. You have to unpack it a little bit. When that unpacking usually happens is in the second point. So you do HOAs first, and then you do unrestricted neighborhoods second. Oh, and that should say unrestricted. Sorry about that. I'm going to abbreviate there. Okay, so in that second one, it's going to be a little bit longer because then once you've laid out the unrestricted neighborhood, you could say, now, as shown, there's points of compare, there's relationship. They're similar when they do X, Y, and Z, but they're not. So that second paragraph in each of those sections is probably going to be just a little bit chunkier, just a little bit longer. And so you see that at the end of each section where your phraseology for compare and contrast come up. Okay, and then you have a conclusion as well. Maybe you make a recommendation, which is what the assignment actually asks for. So if you go to Essay 2 and you see that it says you have a thesis, you make a recommendation, you could say, based on all of the variables, HOAs aren't actually that bad, or you say there are significant risks to personal interest to stay in an HOA. So that's like your argument. In the conclusion, you restate that argument in a fresh way, and maybe you provide an interesting lingering detail. Okay, so this is one option for setting up your compare and contrast. The other option is block comparison. So in this method, you overview HOAs, and then you separately overview unrestricted neighborhoods. It looks like this. Again, always framed with introduction and conclusion. Your introduction is the warm-up, and it includes your thesis. Right? And your conclusion restates thesis. And you let your reader go. You don't leave any questions lingering. So for example, if you asked a rhetorical question in the introduction, answer that in the conclusion. That's kind of a nice way to mirror it. Introductions and conclusions are similar. They're like fraternal twins. It's another way to sort of reinforce your points, but you let readers go. You don't provide anything crazily new in the conclusion. But you have just two sections in block. You'll notice the first section is all about HOAs with your 3 points of contention. And then the second section is unrestricted neighborhoods with those same 3 points of contention. Again, 6 body paragraphs. So you're not doing any more or any less writing, but this one, you're putting all the HOA content in one section and all the unrestricted content in one section. I find that most students will do option 1. But neither is better or worse than the other. It just sort of depends on what you're comparing and where your comfort level is. Note as well that it says in each of these sections, as in option 1, within the unrestricted points of comparison, those paragraphs 4 through 6 are going to be a little bit longer than 1 through 3 because you have to add in those particular terms. And so speaking of transitional words, let me go in and you can do a quick Google search like I'm doing now. You can say essay transition words. We may have some links already in the section, but there was smart words, I think, is the one that I really liked. Yes. So I'm going to include this link right next to where the video is, so you can see that, especially when you're doing a compare contrast paper, what's nice is that in the secondary comparisons for unrestricted neighborhoods, for example, you could use a word like in addition to. In addition to the way HOAs gauge costs, you're going to have costs in unrestricted neighborhoods, and so you can do it that way. Words that show agreement are words like also, or phrases like as well as or additionally. So you can play around with how you show agreement. These are those signal words, transitions that show relationships. Like relationships. Now, when you're doing some contrast points, you see on the second half, you've got ones like in contrast or on the contrary or even though or although. So you don't have to get fancy with this. You can be as straight talking as you want to make the comparisons easy for your readers to make decisions based on your recommendations. Okay. Now, you can come back to this link a little bit later on when we do our cause effect paper because it's great. It shows transitional words that will help connect causes and effects to one another as well. So, and then of course, my favorite example ones are for example and such as. I don't know if they have such as. Yep, they do have such as in there. So just as a short, I guess a short recording note, I'm also going to post this Word document in the announcement as well as the hyperlink to transition words. Let me know if you have any questions. I will be working from home tomorrow, so you can reach out. We can talk about your papers before you submit them. Good luck.